The wind was screaming at 14,000 feet when I saw it. Not the thing that saved my life, but the thing that almost ended it. A crack, spreading like lightning across the ice wall I'd been climbing for the past 6 hours. In that moment, hanging by my fingertips above a 1,000-foot drop, I knew I was going to die. What happened next? What really happened? I've kept secret for 12 years. Not because anyone told me to. Not because I signed anything, but because I knew no one would believe me. Because I barely believe it myself. My name is David Mitchell. Until that day in March 2012, I was just another weekend warrior trying to bag peaks in the Colorado Rockies. I'd been climbing for 15 years, nothing professional, just a hobby that kept me sane between long weeks at my accounting firm in Denver. I'd summited 47 of Colorado's 14ers. Number 48 was supposed to be Windham Peak, a remote mountain in the Weminuche Wilderness. It nearly became my grave. I should have turned back when I lost the trail. Should have listened to that voice in my head when the weather started changing. But summit fever is real and it makes you stupid. By noon I was off route, climbing a near vertical ice face on the north side of the mountain. The storm hit 20 minutes later. You don't know cold until you've been caught in a whiteout at altitude. The temperature dropped 40 degrees in minutes. My water bottles froze solid. Ice formed on my eyelashes, welding them shut every time I blinked. The wind was so strong it ripped one of my crampons clean off my boot. That's when I made the mistake that should have killed me. I reached for a handhold that wasn't there. My ice axe slipped, and suddenly I was falling. Time does slow down when you think you're about to die. I remember every detail of those 3 seconds. The sound of my remaining crampons scraping against ice. The feeling of my backpack pulling me backward. The crack of my helmet hitting rock, then nothing. When I woke up, I couldn't feel my legs. Blood was pooling in the snow beneath me, turning it pink in the fading daylight. My left arm was bent at an angle arms don't bend. The storm was getting worse, and I was completely alone. Miles from any trail with no cell service and no one expecting me back for 2 more days. I tried to move and screamed. The sound disappeared into the wind like it never existed. My GPS was smashed. My emergency beacon had been ripped off my pack during the fall. I managed to drag myself maybe 10 feet before I collapsed, shaking from cold and shock. That's when I heard the breathing. Not wind, not the sound of snow sliding off rocks. Breathing. Deep, rhythmic breathing coming from somewhere above me in the whiteout. I tried to call out, but my voice was gone. The breathing got closer. Then I saw the footprint. It appeared in the snow about 5 feet from my face. Fresh, impossibly large, at least 18 inches long and 8 inches wide. The toes were visible, spread wide like someone walking barefoot. Except no one walks barefoot at 14,000 feet in a blizzard. No one human. Another footprint appeared, then another. They were circling me. The breathing was so close now I could smell it. Musky, animal, but different from any wildlife I'd encountered. Like wet dog mixed with pine sap and something earthier, older. The storm cleared for just a moment. Just long enough for me to see what was standing over me. It was massive. 8 feet tall at least, covered in dark brown hair that was matted with ice and snow. Its shoulders were broader than any human's, its arms hanging down past its knees. But it was the face that made me forget about my injuries, forget about the cold, forget about everything except pure primal terror. It was almost human. The eyes were deep-set, intelligent, studying me with what looked like curiosity. The nose was flat, wide. The mouth was hidden behind a beard of frozen hair. It tilted its head the way a dog does when it's trying to understand something. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. We stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then it reached down. I thought it was going to kill me. tear me apart. Instead, its massive hand, easily twice the size of mine, touched my broken arm with surprising gentleness. I screamed. It pulled back, making a sound I'll never forget. Not quite a grunt, not quite speech, but something in between. Like it was trying to communicate, it disappeared into the storm. I thought I was hallucinating, that hypothermia was making me see things. Then I felt myself being lifted. The grip around my torso was firm but careful, like someone holding an injured bird. I was pressed against that massive chest, surrounded by that wild smell. Through my fading consciousness, I remember thinking how warm it was, like being wrapped in a living furnace. The next few hours exist in fragments, the sensation of moving fast through the storm, the sound of heavy breathing that wasn't mine, glimpses of massive footprints appearing and disappearing in the snow, the feeling of going down, always down, away from the death zone above tree line. I remember trees appearing out of the white, the relief of being out of the wind, being set down, almost gently against a fallen log. Those eyes looking at me one more time before disappearing into the forest. I passed out. When search and rescue found me 18 hours later, I was 7 miles from where I'd fallen. 7 miles through terrain they said was impassable in those conditions. My core temperature should have killed me hours ago, but somehow I was alive. Hypothermic, concussed with a shattered arm and severe frostbite, but alive. They asked me how I got down the mountain. I told them I didn't remember, that I must have crawled, delirious from the cold. They looked at each other with expressions I couldn't read. Later, in the hospital, one of the rescue team members came to see me privately. His name was Tom Bradley. He'd been doing mountain rescue for 20 years. He sat in the chair next to my bed and was quiet for a long time before he spoke. "You didn't crawl 7 miles, he said finally. Not with those injuries, not in that storm. I kept my eyes closed, pretending to be asleep. We found the tracks, he continued, around where you were lying and leading away into the forest. He paused. They weren't human. I opened my eyes. He was staring at me, waiting. I don't know what you're talking about, I said. He nodded slowly. Yeah, that's what I thought you'd say. He stood up to leave, then turned back. You're not the first one, you know. Not the first person to come off that mountain with a story they won't tell. He left a business card on my bedside table. On the back, he'd written a single word. Believe. I never called him, never told anyone what really happened. I went back to my life, my job, my normal world where massive, intelligent creatures don't exist. But I couldn't stop thinking about it, couldn't stop seeing those eyes in my dreams. 6 months later, I went back, not to climb. I couldn't do that anymore. The frostbite had taken 2 of my toes and my left arm still didn't work quite right. But I had to know if it was real, if I'd really seen what I thought I'd seen. I hired a guide to take me to the base of Windham Peak, told him I wanted to photograph the mountain that almost killed me, some kind of therapeutic closure. He bought it. We camped at Chicago Basin, a popular spot about 4 miles from where I'd been rescued. That night I left the tent and walked into the forest alone. I didn't go far, just to a clearing where I could see the stars. I stood there for an hour, listening to the night sounds, feeling ridiculous. What was I expecting, that it would just show up because I wanted it to? I was about to head back when I heard it. A wood knock, clear, deliberate, echoing through the valley. Then another from a different direction, and another. They were communicating. I stayed perfectly still. The knocking stopped. The forest went silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then, at the edge of the clearing, barely visible in the moonlight, I saw a shape. Tall, upright, motionless, watching me. We stood there, 2 beings from different worlds, acknowledging each other across an impossible divide. I wanted to move closer, to speak, to somehow communicate my gratitude. But I understood this was as close as we would ever be. This moment of mutual recognition was all I would get. It turned and walked back into the forest. Not quickly, not like it was afraid. Just a calm, deliberate walk that said our encounter was over. I never saw it again, but I kept going back. Every year on the anniversary of my rescue, I returned to those mountains. Not to search or to document, just to remember. To leave a small offering of food at the base of a particular tree. To say thank you to something that shouldn't exist but does. I researched quietly, found reports going back decades. Hikers pulled from avalanches and left where rescuers could find them. Lost hunters discovered miles from where they disappeared, unconscious but alive, with no memory of how they'd traveled through impassable terrain. Always in the same general area. Always with those unexplained tracks nearby. The indigenous peoples of the region have stories that go back centuries. They call them the Old Ones, the first people, the keepers of the high places. Sacred beings that should be respected, never hunted, never pursued. They know. They've always known. I started finding others like me, people who'd been saved but never spoke about it publicly. We meet sometimes unofficially, share our stories in hushed voices, compare details that match too perfectly to be coincidence. The smell, the gentleness despite the obvious strength, the intelligence in those eyes. There's a network of us now. Survivors, we call ourselves. We don't seek publicity, don't want to turn our saviors into tourist attractions or targets for trophy hunters. We just quietly document, preserve the truth for those who need to know it. Some of us leave food caches in strategic locations before winter storms. Others work to protect certain areas from development. A few have positions in parks and wildlife agencies, subtly steering policy to preserve habitat. We don't coordinate formally, but we all understand our debt. I've never taken a photo, never tried to gather physical evidence. That's not what this is about. It's about acknowledging that we share this world with something extraordinary. Something that chose to save my life when it could have easily let me die. The nightmares started about a year after my rescue, not about the fall or the near-death experience. Those I could handle. These were different. In them, I was back on the mountain, but this time I was watching someone else fall. Someone else lying broken in the snow, and I was the one walking away, leaving them to die. I'd wake up gasping, covered in sweat, with that smell in my nostrils. That wild, ancient smell that meant safety to me but would mean terror to someone who didn't understand. My therapist said it was survivor's guilt, that I was processing the trauma of my near-death experience. She didn't know about the real rescue. Couldn't know. How do you tell a medical professional that your PTSD isn't from almost dying but from being saved by something that officially doesn't exist? So I dealt with it alone. Started spending more time in the wilderness, but never climbing. Just hiking, always in areas where there had been sightings. Learning to read the signs. Broken branches at heights no human could reach. Trees twisted in ways that wind couldn't cause. Those distinctive tracks that appear after fresh snow and disappear just as quickly. I learned that they're most active at dawn and dusk. That they avoid trail cameras but sometimes trigger them from distances that shouldn't be possible. That they're curious about humans but maintain strict boundaries. That they have families, communities, a complex social structure we can only guess at. 5 years after my rescue, I had my second encounter. I was camping alone in the San Juan National Forest, not far from where I'd been saved. It was late September, the aspen trees burning gold in the afternoon light. I'd chosen a spot off-trail next to a small creek, quiet, isolated, perfect for reflection. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of rocks being moved in the creek. Not the random tumble of natural erosion. Deliberate placement. like someone building something. I unzipped my tent slowly, quietly. The moon was full, bright enough to see clearly. And there, in the middle of the creek, was a juvenile, smaller than the one that saved me, maybe 6 feet tall. It was stacking rocks, creating a small dam. It worked with focus, intelligence, selecting each rock carefully, testing the stability before adding the next one. It was using tools, a large stick to lever heavier rocks into place, the kind of problem-solving you'd expect from a human child, but with strength no human possessed. I must have made a sound, shifted slightly because it suddenly froze, turned its head toward my tent. We locked eyes across maybe 30 feet of space. This one's eyes were different, younger, more curious than cautious. It tilted its head, that same gesture I remembered from my rescue. Then, from the forest behind my tent came a low vocalization. Not quite a growl, more like a rumbled warning. The juvenile immediately abandoned its dam and moved toward the tree line. But it stopped at the edge of the forest, looked back at me once more. I swear it looked disappointed, like a kid whose playtime had been cut short. They were gone in seconds, melting into the forest with barely a sound despite their size. But I could feel them watching for the rest of the night. Not threatening, just observing. Making sure I didn't follow, didn't pose a threat to their young. In the morning, the dam was still there. A perfect little construction that pooled the creek into a small fishing hole. I sat by it for hours, studying the engineering, the intentional design. This wasn't random animal behavior. This was intelligence, creativity, purpose. I left my own stack of rocks nearby, not as well built but clearly artificial. A message that I understood, that I respected their space. When I came back a month later, my stack had been improved, made more stable with additional rocks. A response, a communication, that became our thing. Every few months I'd return to that spot. Sometimes the dam would be gone, washed away by spring floods or winter ice. Sometimes it would be rebuilt, improved, expanded. I'd leave my own small constructions, rock patterns, stick arrangements, things that showed intelligence but posed no threat. Once I found a gift, a piece of quartz clearly selected for its beauty, placed on top of my most recent rock stack. I keep it on my desk at home. My lucky rock, I tell people. They have no idea how lucky. The year 2018 changed everything. That's when I met Rebecca Torres. She found me through Tom Bradley, the rescue team member who'd left me his card. Rebecca was a wildlife biologist who'd been fired from the Forest Service for refusing to redact certain observations from her field reports. Observations of tracks, hair samples, and behavioral patterns that didn't match any known species. We met at a coffee shop in Durango. She looked exhausted, defeated. 20 years of scientific training battling against evidence that science refused to acknowledge. "Tom said you were rescued," she said without preamble. "Said you might understand." I told her everything. The fall, the rescue, my subsequent encounters. She listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding as details matched her own research. When I finished, she pulled out a map of the San Juan Mountains. It was covered in red dots, hundreds of them. Each one, she explained, was a credible sighting or encounter from the past 50 years. The concentration around Windham Peak was so dense the dots overlapped. "They're not random," she said. "The sightings, they follow patterns, seasonal movements, territorial boundaries, family groups. I've been tracking them for 15 years. She showed me photos of tracks, hair samples, even thermal imaging that showed large, upright heat signatures in areas where no humans were present. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and completely ignored by mainstream science. "Why save people?" I asked. "Why risk exposure?" She smiled sadly. "That's the question, isn't it? My theory? They understand empathy in ways we're only beginning to grasp. They see suffering and respond. It's not human morality, but it's morality nonetheless. We became research partners after that. Unofficial, unfunded, but dedicated. She had the scientific background I lacked. I had the personal experience she craved. Together, we began piecing together a more complete picture of the beings that had saved my life. They're not apes, not missing links. They're something else entirely. Parallel evolution, perhaps. Or survivors from a branch of the hominid tree we haven't discovered yet. They're intelligent, possibly more so than us in certain ways. They have language, culture, technology adapted to their needs. And they've chosen to remain hidden, emerging only when necessity or compassion demands it. Rebecca introduced me to others in her network. Former park rangers who'd been ordered to destroy evidence. Police officers who'd responded to encounters only to have their reports buried. Scientists whose careers had been derailed by their refusal to ignore what they'd seen. We call ourselves the Keepers. Not because we keep them secret, though we do, but because we keep the knowledge, preserve the truth for a time when the world might be ready to accept it. My closest call came in 2019. I was doing a solo overnight in a restricted area of the Weminuche Wilderness. Technically trespassing, but I'd learned that the restricted zones often coincided with high-activity areas. The Forest Service claimed it was for wildlife preservation, but we knew better. I'd set up camp near a natural hot spring, a place Rebecca's thermal imaging had shown consistent activity. The plan was simple observation. No cameras, no recording equipment, just eyes and ears and a notebook. They came at dusk, 3 of them, 2 adults and what looked like an adolescent. They moved through the forest like shadows, barely disturbing the undergrowth despite their size. They knew I was there, had probably known since I'd arrived. But they came anyway. They settled by the hot spring about 50 yards from my position. Close enough to observe, far enough that I couldn't make out fine details in the fading light. They seemed to be grooming each other, using their fingers to remove debris from their hair. The kind of social behavior you see in primate groups, but more deliberate, more careful. The adolescent was playful, splashing in the warm water. One of the adults, the larger one, made a sound that could only be described as laughter. Deep, resonant, unmistakably amused. The other adult was more watchful, occasionally glancing in my direction. Then I heard the helicopter. It came in low and fast, no running lights. Military or government, definitely not civilian. The family group scattered instantly, vanishing into the forest with speed that seemed impossible for their size. But the adolescent hesitated, confused by the sudden noise and lights. The helicopter was circling now, searchlights sweeping the forest. It would find me within seconds, and when it did, they'd find my notebook, my observations. Everything I'd promised to keep secret. I made a decision that probably saved more than just my own skin. I stood up, walked directly into the clearing by the hot spring, made myself the obvious target. The searchlight hit me immediately, blinding white. The helicopter descended, hovering just above the tree line. I raised my hands, playing the lost hiker. Stumbled around like I was disoriented, desperate for rescue. The spotlight stayed on me as the helicopter looked for a place to land. In my peripheral vision, I saw the adolescent slip away into the darkness. 2 men in tactical gear rappelled down. No insignia, no identification. They weren't there to rescue me. "This is a restricted area," one said. "You're under arrest for federal trespassing." They zip-tied my hands, confiscated my backpack. The notebook was in my inner jacket pocket. They didn't search me that thoroughly. Small mercies. The interrogation lasted 12 hours. Who was I working with? What had I seen? Why was I really there? I stuck to my story. Got lost. Wanted to see the hot springs. Didn't know it was restricted. just a dumb tourist with a history of bad decisions in the mountains. They knew I was lying. I knew they knew. But without evidence, without the notebook they hadn't found, they had nothing. They released me with a federal warning and a promise that next time wouldn't be so gentle. Rebecca was furious when I told her. Not at me, but at how close we'd come to exposure. The helicopter patrol was new, a sign that someone in the government was taking the situation more seriously. We had to be more careful, but I couldn't stop thinking about that adolescent. How the adults had laughed at its play, how they'd groomed each other with such care, how human they'd seemed in those moments before the helicopter arrived, and how quickly they'd disappeared when threatened, protecting their young just like any parent would. That's when I truly understood. They weren't hiding because they were afraid of us. They were hiding because they understood us, knew what we did to things we didn't understand, chose concealment over conflict, the smart choice, the compassionate choice, the choice that had kept them alive while we drove so many other species to extinction. 2020 changed the game for everyone, including the keepers. With fewer people in the wilderness during lockdowns, sightings increased dramatically. Trail cameras that had been dormant for years suddenly captured images. Not clear ones, never clear ones, but enough to spark interest. The internet exploded with theories, hoaxes, and buried within them real encounters from people who finally felt safe sharing their stories. I started a blog, anonymous, encrypted, hosted on servers in countries with strong privacy laws. Just a place for people like me to share without fear of ridicule or reprisal. The stories poured in. A nurse from Oregon who'd been led out of a forest fire by something large and hairy. A child from Alaska who'd been returned to his family after being lost for 3 days, talking about the big, furry friend who'd kept him warm. An elderly woman from Montana who'd been leaving food in the same spot for 40 years, ever since one had helped her escape an abusive husband hiding in the woods. Each story was different, but the patterns were consistent. Intelligence, compassion, a desire to help coupled with a need to remain hidden. And always, always that same description. Massive, covered in hair, eyes that held more intelligence than any animal should possess. Rebecca used the data to refine her population models. Conservative estimate, 3,000 individuals across North America. Realistic estimate, closer to 10,000. They were breeding, thriving, adapting to human encroachment without ever fully revealing themselves. We also discovered we weren't alone in our knowledge. Indigenous communities had been protecting them for generations. They had protocols, agreements passed down through oral tradition. Don't seek them out. Don't speak of them to outsiders. Leave offerings but never expect contact. Respect the boundaries they set. One elder from the Mountain Ute tribe agreed to speak with me off the record. He told me stories that went back centuries, how his ancestors had shared the mountains with them, how they'd helped each other during harsh winters, how the arrival of European settlers had driven them deeper into the wilderness but never eliminated them entirely. They are our older brothers, he said. They were here first. We learned from them how to survive in these mountains. Now they learn from us how to stay hidden. It's a fair trade. He showed me petroglyphs that mainstream archaeologists had misinterpreted. Not stylized humans or gods, but accurate depictions of exactly what I'd seen on that mountain. The proportions were perfect, the details precise. These weren't myths or legends, they were historical records. That's when I realized the weight of what I carried. Not just my own experience, but the continuation of knowledge that stretched back millennia. The keepers weren't discovering something new. We were rediscovering something that had been deliberately obscured. My health started declining in 2021. Nothing dramatic, just the accumulated toll of frostbite, hypothermia, and a body pushed too hard for too long. The doctors said I needed to stop my wilderness trips, that my damaged circulation couldn't handle the altitude anymore. I ignored them, of course. Went back to Wyndham Peak that September against Rebecca's warnings and my doctor's orders. I had to. It had been 10 years since my rescue, a decade of keeping this secret, of living with the knowledge that something extraordinary had chosen to save my worthless life. The climb to tree line nearly killed me. Every step was agony, my damaged foot screaming with each placement. My partially paralyzed arm made balance difficult. By the time I reached the spot where I'd fallen, I was exhausted, breathing hard in the thin air. I sat there for hours, looking at the ice face that had nearly been my tomb. The crack was still visible, a scar across the rock. Below the drop that should have killed me. Above the summit I'd never reached and never would. As the sun set, I pulled out the piece of quartz they'd left me. Held it up to the dying light, watching the colors dance inside its crystalline structure. A gift from one intelligence to another. Proof that we weren't alone, had never been alone. That's when I heard the breathing again. Same sound, same rhythm. But this time I wasn't afraid. I turned slowly, my damaged body protesting every movement. It stood at the edge of my vision, partially hidden behind a rock outcrop. Massive, imposing, but somehow less frightening than that first encounter. Maybe because I understood now, or maybe because it wanted me to feel safe. We regarded each other across 30 feet of space and a decade of shared history. It looked older, or maybe I was just seeing more clearly. Gray streaked through its dark hair, scars across its visible skin. A survivor like me. I wanted to thank it, to somehow communicate my gratitude for the life it had given back to me. But I knew words meant nothing here. So I did the only thing I could think of. I stood up, slowly, painfully, placed the piece of quartz on the ground between us. And then I did something I'd never done before. I turned my back and walked away. Trust, the ultimate communication between two beings who couldn't speak the same language. I made it 10 steps before I heard movement behind me. Not approaching, but moving. When I finally turned around, it was gone. But the quartz had been moved, placed on top of a flat rock surrounded by a perfect circle of smaller stones. A message, an acknowledgement. A goodbye. I knew I'd never come back to this spot. My body couldn't handle it anymore. This was my last pilgrimage to the place where my old life ended and my new one began. And somehow, it had known. Had come to give me closure. The descent nearly finished what the mountain had started a decade ago. I collapsed twice, my vision graying at the edges, but each time I found the strength to continue. Not my strength. The strength that came from knowing something watched over me, protected me, even if I never saw it again. Rebecca found me at the trailhead, unconscious in my car. She'd driven up when I'd missed my check-in, knowing I'd do something stupid. The hospital kept me for a week. Severe dehydration, altitude sickness, and what one doctor called the worst case of stubborn idiocy he'd ever seen. But I'd gotten what I came for. Closure. Peace. The knowledge that my rescue hadn't been random. That I'd been chosen for something, even if I didn't understand what. The blog exploded after I posted about my anniversary visit. Not with the full details, never the full details, but enough to let others know that connections were possible. That the beings who'd saved so many of us were aware of our gratitude. Messages flooded in. Others who'd returned to their rescue sites, who'd left offerings, who'd received signs that their saviors remembered them. We weren't just random individuals anymore. We were a community bound by an experience that transformed how we saw the world. That winter, something unprecedented happened. A massive blizzard trapped a family of 4 in their car on a remote mountain pass in Wyoming. They were there for 3 days before rescue found them. All 4 survived, despite temperatures that should have killed them. The youngest, a 6-year-old girl, told rescuers that the furry giants had kept them warm, had brought them food, had stayed with them until they heard the helicopters coming. The parents tried to silence her, but she'd already said too much. The story went viral. News crews descended on the area. The government tried to claim it was hallucinations brought on by hypothermia. But the girl was insistent, detailed, convincing. And then she showed them the gift. A perfect piece of carved wood shaped into a rough animal form. Could have been a bear, could have been something else. But the carving was intricate, deliberate, made with tools and intelligence. The parents couldn't explain it. Said it had appeared in the car on the second night, along with pine nuts and dried berries that had kept them from starving. The media frenzy lasted 2 weeks before being mysteriously shut down. The family disappeared from public view. The carved figure was lost by authorities, but the damage was done. Millions had heard the story, seen the photos before they were scrubbed from the internet. The secret was fracturing. Rebecca and I met with other keepers to discuss what to do. Some wanted to go public with everything. Others insisted on maintaining silence. The debate got heated, personal. Friendships that had lasted years shattered over the question of disclosure. In the end, we chose a middle path. We would document everything, preserve all evidence, but release it slowly. Let the world adjust gradually to the possibility. Prepare humanity for a revelation that would fundamentally challenge our understanding of our place in the natural world. I was chosen to write the first official account. This account, the full story of my rescue and the decade that followed. Every detail I'd hidden, every encounter I'd cherished, every piece of evidence we'd collected. But even now, writing these words, I hold back certain things. Locations too specific, behaviors too intimate, knowledge that could be used to harm them. Because that's the real fear. Not that people won't believe, but that they will. What happens when the world accepts that we share the planet with another intelligent species? One that's avoided us for centuries? One that's shown more compassion to lost humans than we've shown to any species we've encountered? History gives us the answer, and it's not encouraging. But there's hope in the children who see them and aren't afraid, in the indigenous communities who've protected them for generations, in the growing network of keepers who understand that some things are more important than scientific fame or financial gain, and in them, in their continued willingness to help despite the risk, in their choice to save rather than harm, in the intelligence that's kept them hidden but not hostile. 2022 brought a breakthrough we'd never expected. Rebecca had been analyzing acoustic data from the Wemanouche wilderness, recordings made by automated stations studying wildlife communication. Hidden in the background noise, she found patterns, vocalizations in frequencies just below human hearing. Complex, structured, linguistic. They were talking, had always been talking. We just couldn't hear them. She developed filters, amplification algorithms. Suddenly, the forest came alive with conversation. Not words we could understand, but definitely language. Questions and answers, warnings and acknowledgments. Parents calling to children, children responding. One recording stood out, made the night I'd placed the quartz at Wyndham Peak. A long, complex vocalization from multiple individuals. It had the cadence of discussion, debate even. And then, at the end, what sounded like consensus. Agreement. They'd been talking about me. The implications were staggering. Every encounter we'd documented, every sighting we'd recorded had potentially been discussed by them. They knew about us as individuals, made decisions about when to help, when to hide, when to reveal themselves. We weren't studying them. They were managing us. This revelation changed everything for me. The rescue wasn't random. It had been a choice, possibly debated and decided by the group. They'd chosen to save me, knowing the risk, understanding the consequences, but why? What criteria did they use? How did they decide who to help and who to let nature take its course? Rebecca had a theory. She'd mapped every documented rescue against various factors. Time of year, weather conditions, age of the victim, circumstances of the emergency. No clear pattern. But when she added one more variable, everything clicked. Intention. Every person saved had been in the wilderness for pure reasons. Not hunting for trophies, not exploiting resources, not seeking fame or fortune. They were hikers, climbers, nature photographers. People who came to the mountains with respect even if they made mistakes. I thought about my own mindset that day. I'd been stupid, yes, reckless, but I'd come to the mountain with love for the challenge, respect for the environment. Maybe that's all it took. Maybe they could sense intention the way we sense fear or aggression. Rebecca disagreed, said I was anthropomorphizing, but I knew better. I'd looked into those eyes, seen the intelligence there. They understood us better than we understood ourselves. The acoustic recordings led to another discovery: infrasound, sounds below human hearing that travel for miles. The mountain itself was alive with their communications. Every peak, every valley connected by invisible threads of sound. When I'd fallen, my scream had been above their acoustic range, but the impact, my body hitting rock and snow, had created infrasound. A distress signal I hadn't known I was sending. They'd heard me from miles away, debated, decided, acted. The one that saved me had been chosen or had volunteered, taken a massive risk to pull me from death's edge, and afterward they'd discussed it, shared the information, added my story to their collective knowledge of human behavior. I wasn't just rescued, I was studied. My recovery, my return visits, my attempts at communication, all observed, documented in their own way, added to a database we could only imagine. The thought should have been unsettling, being watched, analyzed, categorized by another intelligence. But instead, it was comforting. We weren't alone in our curiosity. They wanted to understand us as much as we wanted to understand them. That's when I made a decision that Rebecca called foolish and beautiful in equal measure. I stopped hiding my story, not from the media or the government. They still couldn't know. But from regular people, the ones who came to my blog seeking answers, who'd had their own encounters but doubted their sanity, who needed to know they weren't alone. I started hosting gatherings, small groups in private homes, no recordings, no phones, just people sharing their truth. The stories were incredible. Generations of secrets finally spoken aloud, patterns emerging from isolated incidents. A hidden history of coexistence. An old rancher from Texas talked about finding his lost cattle driven back to his land during a blizzard. Massive footprints in the snow, the only explanation. A forest firefighter from California described being led to safety through smoke so thick she couldn't see her own hands, guided by something large that stayed just out of sight. A child psychologist from Seattle shared drawings from young patients, all depicting the same large, hairy friend who'd helped them when they were lost or scared. Each story added a piece to the puzzle. They weren't random, weren't chaotic. They had territories but would travel vast distances to help. They had families but would risk exposure to save a stranger. They avoided us but watched over us. We were like dangerous children to them, unpredictable, destructive but still worth protecting. Still worth saving. The government knew. Of course they knew, had always known. The restricted areas, the buried reports, the silenced witnesses. It was protection, but not the kind we'd thought. They weren't protecting us from them, they were protecting them from us. A retired federal agent joined one of our gatherings. After 3 hours of listening to our stories, he finally spoke. "Operation Greenwood," he said quietly. 1973 to present. Monitoring, misdirection, and management of cryptid encounters in protected federal lands. The room went silent. He continued. Priority 1, prevent public confirmation. Priority 2, protect the indigenous population from exploitation. Priority 3, maintain plausible deniability. Indigenous population, not animals, not cryptids. Population. They've known since the 50s, he said. Maybe earlier. There are films, tissue samples, even communication attempts, all classified beyond top secret, all hidden in budgets for environmental protection and wildlife management. Someone asked why he was telling us this. Because I was there in '87 when we captured one. Juvenile, injured, separated from its group. We had it for 6 hours before the others came. He paused, his hands shaking slightly. 30 of them. Could have torn the facility apart. Instead, they waited at the fence line. Just stood there watching, waiting for us to do the right thing. We released it. No one above my pay grade ever knew. The official report says we lost power and the specimen escaped. But I knew. We all knew. They could have killed us any time. They chose not to. He looked around the room at all of us. You've all been touched by their mercy. That's why you're here. That's why you can never really go back to the world you knew before. Because you know the truth. We're not the apex predators, we're not alone, and we're not the most compassionate species on this planet. The room erupted in questions, but he was done talking. Left shortly after, disappeared into the night. We never saw him again. But his words stayed with us. Confirmation of what we'd suspected. We were part of something bigger, older, more complex than any of us had imagined. That night changed my perspective again. The secret wasn't just about them. It was about us. About what humanity would do if we knew. The government's fear wasn't unfounded. History showed us what happened when we encountered other intelligences. Exploitation, extermination, or experimentation. Never coexistence. But maybe we were evolving. Maybe the fact that so many of us could keep this secret, could choose protection over profit, meant humanity was growing. Learning. Becoming something better. I thought about the one who'd saved me. Had it known the risk it was taking? Not just from exposure, but from creating another human who knew the truth? Another potential threat to its family, its species? Yes, it had known. And it had saved me anyway. That's the thing about compassion. Real compassion. It doesn't calculate risk versus reward. It sees suffering and acts, even when acting could cost everything. They were teaching us whether they meant to or not, teaching us what it meant to be truly human by being something beyond human, something better. My last encounter happened 3 months ago. I'd been diagnosed with cancer, lung cancer, despite never smoking. The doctor said it was aggressive, gave me 6 months to a year. The irony wasn't lost on me. Survived a fall that should have killed me, only to be taken by cells that forgot how to die. I needed to return to the wilderness one more time, not to Windham Peak. I couldn't make that climb anymore. But to the forest, to the places where I'd felt their presence even when I couldn't see them. Rebecca drove me to a cabin she'd been using as a research station, deep in the San Juans, accessible only by 4-wheel drive and determination. She wanted to come with me on my walks, but I needed to be alone, needed to say goodbye in my own way. The first 2 days, nothing, just forest sounds and my own labored breathing. The cancer had spread to my bones, making every step an exercise in pain management. But pain was an old friend now. We'd met on a mountain face 10 years ago. I could handle its company a little longer. On the 3rd night they came. Not 1, not 3, Dozens. They emerged from the forest like shadows becoming solid, all sizes, from juveniles to massive adults. They formed a loose circle around the clearing where I sat, far enough that I couldn't see details in the moonlight. Close enough that I could feel their presence like electricity in the air. I should have been terrified. Surrounded by beings that could tear me apart without effort. Instead, I felt what I'd felt that day on the mountain, safe, protected, seen. We sat together for hours, no movement, no sound except breathing and the occasional shift of weight. They were honoring me, I realized, acknowledging what I'd become, a bridge between worlds, a keeper of secrets, a voice for the voiceless. As dawn approached, one of them moved forward, not the one who'd saved me. I'd have recognized that presence anywhere. This one was older, moving with the careful dignity of age. It stopped just at the edge of clear visibility, a massive shadow against the lightening sky. It placed something on the ground between us. Then, one by one, others came forward, each leaving something. A rock, a feather, a piece of wood. Small things, natural things, but deliberately chosen, deliberately placed. Gifts, offerings, a funeral rite for someone still living. They knew I was dying, could probably smell it on me, the cancer eating me from the inside. And they'd come to say goodbye, to honor the decade of silence, of protection, of mutual respect. The elder made a sound, low, rhythmic, almost like humming. Others joined in, harmonies and frequencies I could barely hear. The forest itself seemed to vibrate with their song, a lament, a farewell, a thank you. I cried. For the first time since my diagnosis, I cried. Not for my coming death, but for the beauty of being seen and honored by beings I'd never fully know. For the privilege of being part of their story, even in such a small way. As the sun crested the mountains, they faded back into the forest. The elder was the last to go, pausing at the tree line to look back once more. Our eyes met across species, across worlds, across the impossible divide between human and other. Then it was gone. I gathered their gifts carefully, each one precious, irreplaceable. Rebecca would say I was anthropomorphizing again. But she wasn't there, didn't see the intelligence in their placement, the care in their selection. They understood death, understood grief, understood the human need for connection and closure. And they'd given me all of that, at great risk to themselves. That's love. Not human love, but love nonetheless. The kind that transcends species and understanding. The kind that saves a stranger on a mountain. The kind that watches over us even as we destroy the world around us. I'm writing this from my apartment in Denver. The gifts are arranged on my desk where I can see them. Outside, the city sprawls to the horizon, all concrete and glass and human ambition. So far from the wilderness where miracles still happen. Where ancient intelligences still choose compassion over safety. I won't live to see the day when their existence is publicly acknowledged. When the secret breaks wide open and humanity has to reckon with sharing the planet with another sapient species. But I know it's coming. Too many people know now. Too many encounters documented, too much evidence accumulated. When that day comes, I hope we remember the lessons they've taught us. That strength doesn't require violence. That intelligence doesn't require dominance. That compassion is the highest form of evolution. I hope we remember that they saved us first. Over and over they saved us. When they had every reason to let us fall, to let us die, to let us disappear into the wilderness we thought we'd conquered. They chose differently. They chose mercy. The cancer is spreading faster now. The doctors are surprised I'm still coherent, still writing. They don't know about the strength that comes from purpose, from having a story that needs to be told. This is that story, not just of my rescue, but of all the rescues, all the encounters, All the moments when two intelligences met across an impossible divide and chose connection over conflict. To whoever reads this after I'm gone, believe, not in monsters or myths, but in the possibility of coexistence, in the reality of compassion from unexpected sources, in the truth that we are not alone and never have been. Take care of the wild places, not for us, but for them. For the families that live in the shadows of our ambition. For the children who play in streams we'll never see. For the elders who remember when the world was younger and quieter and full of room for everyone. If you're ever lost in the wilderness, truly lost, and you hear breathing that doesn't belong to any animal you know, don't run. Stand still. Show your empty hands. Let them see you're no threat, just another fragile being trying to survive in a dangerous world. They might pass by, hidden in shadow and silence, or they might stop, might reach out with hands that could crush but choose to carry, might save your life and ask nothing in return except your silence. And if they do, if you become one of the saved, remember this. The secret isn't yours to profit from. It's yours to protect, to nurture, to pass on to others who need to know they're not crazy, not alone, not the only ones who've been touched by impossible grace. The sun is setting now. The mountain peaks outside my window are turning gold, then pink, then purple. Somewhere in those mountains they're moving through the forests, hunting, gathering, raising their young, living their lives parallel to ours but separate, safe in their secrecy. Tomorrow Rebecca will come to collect this testimony. She'll add it to the archives, the growing collection of evidence that someday will change the world. But not today. Not while they still need the protection of shadow and silence. My pain medication is wearing off, but I don't want to take more. Want to feel everything in these last moments of clarity. The weight of the story I've carried. The lightness of finally telling it all. The gratitude for a life that should have ended on a mountain but didn't. I think about that crack in the ice. How it spread like lightning, like fate. Like the moment everything changes, how falling felt like flying until it felt like dying. How the breathing in the storm sounded like the earth itself deciding I deserved another chance. 10 years. 10 years of keeping the most important secret I've ever known. 10 years of returning to the wilderness to whisper thank you to the wind. 10 years of being part of something bigger than human understanding. Worth it. Every moment of doubt, every night of silence, every day of carrying truth too heavy for the world to hold. Worth it to know that somewhere something watches over us with more compassion than we've earned. To the one who saved me, I kept my promise. Kept the secret. Protected your family as you protected me. This story will only be released when it can no longer harm you. When the world is ready or when readiness doesn't matter anymore. Thank you for my life, for my purpose, for showing me that humanity isn't the pinnacle of evolution. Just another species trying to survive, capable of both cruelty and kindness. Watched over by older, wiser beings who choose mercy despite our failings. The stars are coming out now. Venus first, bright in the western sky. Then the others slowly filling the darkness with light from impossible distances. Each one a sun, possibly warming worlds we'll never know. Possibly watching over species we can't imagine. But we don't need to imagine. We have them. Here, now, sharing our forests and mountains. Guardians we didn't know we had. Teachers we didn't know we needed. My hands are shaking too much to write more. This will be my last entry. But the story doesn't end here. Every day someone else is saved. Someone else sees eyes that shouldn't exist. Someone else becomes a keeper of the secret. The story continues, in whispered conversations and hidden meetings, in offerings left at tree lines and gifts found in clearings, in children's drawings and elders' songs, in the space between what we know and what we believe. They saved my life on that mountain. But more than that, they saved my soul. Showed me wonder in a world I thought I understood. Gave me purpose when I thought I had none. Taught me that the universe is stranger and more beautiful than we dare imagine. I'm not afraid of dying, not anymore. I've been held by hands that bridge worlds. I've heard songs in frequencies beyond human ears. I've been chosen by an intelligence that saw something worth saving in a broken climber on a frozen mountain. Whatever comes next, whatever waits beyond the last breath, I go knowing this. We are not alone. We are watched. We are, despite everything, loved. The moon is rising now, full, bright, illuminating the mountains where they walk, where they live and laugh and mourn and hope, where they tell stories of the strange hairless beings who sometimes need help, who sometimes show kindness, who sometimes keep promises. This is my promise kept, my debt repaid, my story told. To everyone who reads this, look for them, not with cameras or weapons or the intent to capture. Look with your heart, with the part of you that still believes in magic and mystery and the possibility that the world is bigger than we know. They're out there, watching, waiting, ready to save us from more than just mountains and storms, ready to save us from the loneliness of thinking we're the only ones who matter. We're not. We never were. And that's the most beautiful truth I've ever known. The breathing in the storm, the hand that lifted me, the eyes that saw me worth saving. All of it real, all of it true, all of it waiting for the day when we're ready to accept that we share this world with something magnificent. Until then, they hide, they help, they hope, and so do I. Even as my body fails, even as the cancer claims what the mountain couldn't, I hope. For understanding, for coexistence, for the day when children can talk about their furry friends without being silenced, when scientists can study without being censored, when we can finally acknowledge the impossible truth. They're real, they're here, they're ours to protect as they've protected us. This is David Mitchell, saved by Sasquatch, keeper of secrets, bridge between worlds, signing off for the last time. May you all find your own breathing in the storm. May you all be worthy of saving. May you all keep the secret until it's time for it not to be a secret anymore. The mountains know, the forests remember, and somewhere something beautiful and impossible watches over us all. Thank you for listening to what shouldn't be true but is. Thank you for believing in what can't exist but does. Thank you for being part of the greatest secret never told. Until we meet again in whatever comes after this, remember, you are not alone. You never were. You never will be. The giants walk among us, and sometimes when we need it most, they carry us home.